Well, welcome to 2022 and my very first top 10 video. I held a poll on Twitter asking people what they would like to see more of with my YouTube channel moving forward. I do intend to do a little bit more with this channel. I've been really, really bad at it, and I apologize. But this was the clear winner. They wanted to see top 10, top 25, what have you, and so we're going to go ahead and test that out today with the top 10 places I have been to in Europe. Now, I have not been to Europe very much. I've been mostly to some of the more popular city destinations, um, like Berlin, Vienna, Paris, that sort of thing. But I have definitely seen enough churches that I have a current top 10. That will change over time, I promise you that. As I see more and more of Europe, I promise you that top 10 is going to be it's going to look very different later on. And I'll probably end up doing videos that focus on more selective regions at a time, like top 10 of Rome, top 10 of Munich, top 10 of some specific region of space. So that's something to look forward to. But here we go. So far, my top 10 of Europe. Number 10, Notre Dame in Paris, France. Now, you might be surprised that Notre Dame is that low. It's only number 10 out of all these wonderful, and it's Notre Dame. I mean, it's iconic, and it really is. It really truly is. But remember, there's a lot of churches in Europe, and me personally, I tend to veer more towards the Baroque and Rococo versus Gothic. I love the Gothic churches, but this is my personal favorites, and I tend to look at things more aesthetically, and so I'm going to commit a little bit of blasphemy here and clue you in that I almost didn't include Notre Dame on the list at all. And one of these days that is going to get kicked out by some other church, I promise you that. But I had to. It belongs on a list like this. It really is an iconic church. And I did get to see it pre-fire, so that was fantastic. I got to go to Paris in 2012, spring of 2012. And I actually had the opportunity to visit this church and to attend a Sunday morning mass, which was a wonderful experience. I'd never attended a mass in a cathedral before, and it was thrilling and also humbling at the same time. And because they don't allow tourism until after mass is over, there was nobody in this church. I had this church almost entirely to myself before mass started, and it was just awe-inspiring. Plus, they still allowed me to take some photos beforehand, and so I was lucky enough to be able to get these images of this cathedral without having to shoot through thousands of heads. So that was kind of nice. But I highly recommend that particular experience. It was phenomenal. But this is again an iconic church, 800-year-old church, and certainly one of the finest examples of French Gothic architecture, if not the finest. It's, famous for its grotesques and the flying buttresses and that stunning rose window. That rose window is truly spectacular. I mean, I think it's possibly the only rose window that might be more famous than the Notre Dame rose window is the one at Chartres Cathedral, but this particular rose window is a stunning example of stained glass in the Gothic period. And one of the first things I thought with the fire was, please tell me that rose window survived. And it did, and I was really, really happy. So beautiful, beautiful stained glass work. Notre Dame actually holds 3 important relics. I didn't get to see these particular relics, but they are there. They have the crown of thorns that was placed upon Christ's head, a piece of wood from the cross, and a nail from the cross. And they're highly prized in Christianity. If I had one wish, I've always wished to go back in time. If I could go back in time and see one thing, I'd probably actually choose to see Notre Dame the way it was originally done. A lot of people don't realize that the stonework as it is today, it's plain stonework. That wasn't the case when it was originally done. That stone was painted and gilded in bright colors and rich details, and I really would love to see what that would have looked like. Number 9, we have the cathedral in Innsbruck, the Innsbruck Cathedral. It's known by a couple of names, but it is named technically for Saint James, son of Zebedee, also known as James the Greater, the Apostle of Christ. This is an exquisite Baroque church. I told you I veer towards the Baroque, and Innsbruck has some great Baroque churches. The church includes 9 altars. That includes the high altar, which is entirely made of marble. In fact, all of the altars here are chiefly made of marble, and most of them were donated well, all of the side altars were donated by brotherhoods and private donors at the time. And then the ceiling frescoes are painted by a man named Cosmas Damian Azam. He's one of two Azam brothers who were well known and highly respected for their work on churches during the Baroque era. They did churches all over Bavaria and some in Austria as well. So that was kind of neat for anyone who knows the Azam brothers, to see these ceiling frescoes done by one of them. Was really quite stunning. The church does hold the tomb of Archduke Maximilian III of Austria, Grand Master of the Teutonic Knights, which is just kind of a cool little factoid. If you like church bells, which I personally do, the cathedral does actually have church bells. It has in their tower has 8 bells. You have the grosse Pfarrglocke, which means big parish bell. You have 6 other bells that are named for saints, and then the last one is known as the Totenglocke, or death knell. Not very cheerful, but kind of a cool little thing. And the bells are fantastic. Like I said, I'm a huge sucker for church bells, and if you like those, it's fun to find churches that still have them. And I did hear them ringing. They did ring them out while I was there. Really spectacular. Okay, number 8, we have the Karlskirche in Vienna, Austria. Vienna has a ton of churches. Most people go straight to the Stephansdom, which is a beautiful example of Gothic architecture. It's a little bit different from French Gothic, but the Stephansdom really is impressive, and I would definitely recommend that. But as I said before, I veer towards the Baroque, and because Vienna is known for its Baroque architecture, I do focus on those a little bit more. The Karlskirche is considered one of the finest Baroque churches in Vienna, and that really is saying something. But it also has something I like about it. It has a unique mix of elements from ancient Greece and Rome. It has some Byzantine and Romanesque influences, making it a very unique look, even for a Baroque church. This church was actually commissioned by Holy Roman Emperor Charles VI in gratitude for deliverance from the last Great Plague. He had made a promise to God that if he would release them of the plague, that he would build a church to remember that. The church was actually named for St. Charles Borromeo, who was revealed as a healer for plague sufferers. The high altar of this church depicts St. Borromeo's ascension, complete with angels and rays of light, which are actually vaguely reminiscent of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. There's a high altar there that has a similar type of feel. They're very different stylistically, but you can see some of the elements that are mirrored in the two. As a matter of interest for people who enjoy music, the composer Vivaldi actually passed away in Vienna and was buried beside this church, the Karlskirche. His tomb has been lost over time, but the church does still host concerts of his music, and nothing sounds better music than something held in a cathedral like that. It's just spectacular. Number 7 is Sainte-Chapelle in Paris, France. Sainte-Chapelle, in my opinion, is Paris's most beautiful church. This is an example of the Rayonnant period of Gothic architecture. It's just barely followed what's considered high Gothic architecture. Sainte-Chapelle is no longer an active church. There's no her services held there anymore. It's become a national monument instead, so it is protected as a World Heritage Site. Sainte-Chapelle was actually commissioned by King Louis IX, and this was actually the church that was originally intended to house the crown of thorns that Notre Dame has. King Louis had that as a relic that he personally possessed, and he was going to give it to Sainte-Chapelle to protect, and it was instead given to Notre Dame later. There are actually 2 chapels of Sainte-Chapelle. The lower chapel isn't really all that much. Mostly it's a gift shop at this point, but there is some lovely colorful work in there. But the main attraction really is the upper chapel. You have to go walk around the corner, and there's a little spiral staircase, and it leads up to this phenomenal chapel. I always call it stained glass heaven. There's all this stained glass, and even the statuary and the walls and mosaics and everything, it's all very, very colorful. So even that feels like you're in a stained glass window. That stained glass actually dates back to the 13th century, and it's technically now considered one of the largest collections of 13th century stained glass in the world. The lower chapel was intended for the courtiers, servants, and soldiers of the palace, while the upper chapel was for the royal family and their guests. So this is actually a royal chapel. Like many churches during World War II, the stained glass was removed and preserved in safe spaces. But the varnish that they put on the glass to help protect it from things like dust and scratches while they waited for the war to be over eventually darkened the colors of the glass and obscured a lot of the imagery. So back in 2008, a 7-year restoration project began in order to restore that stained glass. They also did some other repairs on the church, like doing some repairs to the statuary and this sort of thing, fixing some chipped paint and even chipped stone and other elements. And I actually went there while that restoration project was going on. It was about halfway done at the time, so I didn't get to see the full effect of all of the stained glass surrounding me. I only had about half of that, but the stained glass I did see was really, really spectacular. That project is now finished as well, and so if you happen to go to Paris, Sainte-Chapelle is one I would definitely check out. Number 6, we're going to go back to Innsbruck, to the Basilicalton. Innsbruck, by the way, is one of the most charming places I've ever seen. It's like it came straight out of a fairy tale storybook. It's really cute. Um, the Basilicalton is it's one of the largest Rococo churches in Innsbruck. Also, in my opinion, definitely one of the most beautiful, and is home to the Wilton Boys Choir. Uh, the Vienna Boys Choir is of course world famous, but the Wilton Boys Choir is also pretty well known, and that's where they are housed. I love the soft pinks of this church, accented with that gold. It actually has a white and yellow facade. I didn't get a good picture of that, unfortunately, but I do prefer the interior in this case, with that soft pink. The stucco work again is really great. The ceiling frescoes are absolutely stunning, and they're depicting scenes from the life of the Virgin Mary. Now, this church is also called Our Lady Under the Four Columns. And there is actually a legend behind that. This church rests on a more ancient church, and legend has it that originally even Roman legionnaires would worship an image of the Virgin Mary, quote, under the four columns. So that high altar is a freestanding structure with the four columns to maintain the legend of that particular church. On a more personal story here, as I was visiting that particular building, taking my pictures and everything, the caretaker that was still there came up to me and he asked if I was enjoying myself. I was like, oh yeah, this is just a stunning church. He says, well, I have to go, but you're welcome to stay and take photos. Just if you could exit out this little side door and lock up when you go. And I'm like, I don't know that I want the responsibility of locking up a house of God. I think I will follow you out. And so I left with him. First time and only time I've ever been asked to lock up a church, but it was a really cool experience. Number 5 is the Peterskirche in Vienna. We're going back to Vienna for this. This is actually my very favorite church in Vienna. It's even more lavish than the Karlskirka. This particular church, the current church was built in the 18th century, but it is actually believed that there's been a church on this spot for over 1,600 years, which would make it the oldest church location in Vienna. It's really, really impressive. There's a lot of churches that didn't start out as looking like that or even being like that. You'll find a lot of these places where churches have been destroyed and rebuilt or damaged and reconstructed. That's very, very common with churches, especially the older ones. But this is considered the oldest church location in Vienna. This is a Baroque church, again, and the design was somewhat inspired by the St. Peter's Basilica. You can see some similarities you can see where the inspiration comes from. Very different from that light, airy feel from the Basilica Wilton that we just saw. This one has a lot richer, deeper tones and a lot of heavy gilding. The altarpiece is a portrayal of St. Peter and St. John healing the lame in Jerusalem, and just the whole thing is beyond spectacular. I love the organ of the Peterskirche. It's one of my favorite elements of it. That is a stunning organ. One of the things I do like about organs, particularly in Baroque churches, is that every bit of the ornamentation is designed to augment that organ and the sound of that organ. It's something that we don't really do anymore, and the art has been lost over the years, but it's a really impressive element of Baroque architecture. Number 4 is the chapel in Schloss Charlottenburg in Berlin. This is actually a church I didn't know existed until I saw it. It turns out many castles do actually have their own chapels. This was often a way to worship for kings and queens to worship without being ravaged by the crowds. And so they often would put a little chapel in their church. And I literally had no idea about this place. I visited the Charlottenburg because I love palaces and castles as well. And I was just wandering through and going through my own personal tour of this place, and I walked around the corner, and suddenly I was in this chapel. I'm like, where did this come from? I had no idea it was there. It is small, but absolutely stunning. It actually took my breath away when I saw it. It's one of the reasons that it's so high up on the list, because it's so unexpectedly took my breath away. So, so stunning. Every corner is decorated. There's a lot of gilding, um, beautiful pastels. My personal favorite feature is the giant golden crown being carried aloft by marble angels. This is just something that was very common in a royal chapel, is to depict some sort of royal accoutrements. Number 3, we have Melk Abbey in Melk, Austria. This is actually one of the most famous monasteries in the world. And it really is Baroque at its finest. It's richly designed, extensive ceiling frescoes, multiple side chapels. The pulpit is covered in gold from top to bottom. I mean, this is a showstopper for sure. It's eye candy like nothing else. It has this iconic yellow exterior, and that it's actually a really beautiful exterior to the building. The architecture is quite nice, and I actually kind of like a colored building, to be honest. That exterior does draw the eye and makes it instantly recognizable, and it sits atop a hill overlooking the Danube River, so the location itself is just spectacular. This monastery actually was originally a castle. It was given to Benedictine monks from Lambach Abbey by Leopold II. It is still used as a Benedictine monastery today. It's actually the largest one in Austria. Along with the fortress, the monks were also gifted a splinter from the cross of Jesus, now known as the Melk Cross. The cross actually was stolen from the monastery twice, and each time returned in seemingly miraculous ways. Today, it's actually not available to the public and can only be viewed with special permission. Yours truly has never received such permission, but it's a cool little relic that they happen to possess. Also, throughout its history, Melk has been dedicated not only to spirituality, but also explicitly to music. It's a very musical church, and it has played host to an annual international Baroque festival. And honestly, I wouldn't mind going to that. That would be pretty cool. Number 2 is St. Florian in Linz. Linz is not far from Salzburg, Austria. Technically speaking, it is located in a small town just outside of Linz, known as St. Florian. St. Florian Church is in St. Florian City, and the church itself is actually dedicated both to St. Florian and St. Augustine. Now, this is an Augustinian monastery and was elevated to the status of Basilica Minor in 1999. One of these days, I might go through and talk about the distinctions between basilicas and shrines and cathedrals, because there are differences. But the church itself is said to have actually been built over the burial site of St. Florian. St. Florian was a Christian martyr who was killed in 304 AD for refusing to persecute Christians as ordered by the Roman Empire. He admitted to being Christian and was sentenced to death by fire, and it is said that he challenged his executioners to light the fire beneath him, proclaiming, "If you do, I will climb to heaven on the flames." His death was actually a little more grisly than simple burning, although burning was part of it. I'm not going to go into that because I prefer to be a little more lighthearted. But his body was later found by a pious woman. She buried him on the spot where the church now stands, and he is now the patron saint of firefighters and also of chimney sweeps. By the way, if you don't know a lot about the history of the saints, it's really interesting to read up on different saints and how they became saints and what the stories were behind them. There's some really fascinating stories that I really, really enjoy. The church has multiple organs, the grandest of which is the famous Bruckner organ, which has a total of 7,343 pipes. Beautiful organ, actually. Again, one of my favorite organs. I really do think it's quite spectacular. I didn't get to hear this one played, but it's beautiful. The monastery does boast an impressive and beautiful library, which is used as a reference library to this day. Unfortunately, that was closed when I visited the church, as was the Marble Hall. I only really got to see the Abbey Church, so I guess that just means I have to go again, right? All right, before we get to number 1, a couple of quick honorable mentions that honestly could have made the list and didn't quite make the cut. We have Westminster Abbey in London, England. Absolutely fantastic church. if you're in London, you absolutely must see this one. It's stunning, has a lot of history, and sometimes they don't let you take pictures, sometimes they do. I happen to have a, talk with a really nice priest who let me sneak a few in, so yay me. Stiftswilton in Innsbruck, Austria. I really do like Innsbruck, guys. They have some really fantastic churches, and this one, again, has a very, very different look. I like the juxtaposition of the white with the dark marble. Really, really pretty. Then St. Peter's in Salzburg, Austria. We didn't get to a lot of Salzburg today, but Salzburg has some lovely, lovely churches. And St. Peter's is probably my favorite one. Very small, very narrow, but has a lot of beautiful elements, especially their ceiling. It's really, really wonderful. And shameless plug time, guys. Shameless plug time. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, subscribe. If you're interested in actually participating and funding some of the stuff that we do, I do have a Patreon, and my patrons get first dibs on all of the stuff that I do here, even on YouTube. They get videos beforehand, they get history tidbits, they get all kinds of really fun stuff, and depending on your level, some people actually get photos delivered to them on a weekly basis or a monthly basis. There's actually different tiers that do that. So there's my shameless plug. Time for number one. The number one, my very favorite church in Austria, or in Europe, spoiler alert, Austria, is the Klosterneuburg Abbey. This is eye candy through and through. It's fantastic. It's located just outside of Vienna, and this church is dedicated to the Nativity of Mary and is called the Birth of the Virgin. Like St. Florian that we just saw, this is an Augustinian monastery. It was originally founded in 1114 by Leopold III, who was canonized as a saint by Pope Innocent VIII in the year 1485, which made this monastery a historic site. It was reconstructed in the Baroque style in the 1600s, and this actually makes for a very interesting sort of juxtaposition of styles. The interior is very long and narrow, and it seems almost more so because of the high degree of decorative elements that you see. That's because the church's original form was actually Romanesque rather than Baroque. But instead of tearing down the church and rebuilding anything, they used the form. Subsequent builders and designers kept using the same form no matter what the changing styles were. So the Baroque can seem a little overwhelming in the tighter space, but the effect is still pretty mind-blowing. You almost don't even know where to look. There's so much to it. The elaborate woodwork, the ceiling frescoes, the stucco work, all the gilding, every element just draws the eye, and with so much occupying a relatively small space, that's a lot to take in. But it just kind of blew me away. Again, it was one that surprised me. I wasn't sure what to expect when going there, but I was told I had to see it, and I'm really, really glad I did. As of right now, that is my very favorite church in Europe. Truly, truly stunning. Definitely go see it, especially if you happen to be in the Vienna area. It's really not far from that city. So there you have it, guys. My top 10 in Europe so far, and please let me know what you thought, what you agree with, what you don't agree with, what you'd like to see in the future, and I will talk to you soon.